1. How many people in the world are known by everyone? 2,000 years have passed, but we still take vacations on the month named after him, July, and we still give his name to the most powerful kings, Kaiser, Tsar. But he wasn't just a name, he was a systemic error. 2. Gaius Julius Caesar. Most of us think of him as simply an emperor. But he was never an emperor. At the beginning of his career, he was the most indebted man in Rome. He was a gambling aristocrat with creditors waiting at his door. But he had a superpower, writing his own story. He was the greatest PR genius history has ever seen. Especially with the reports he wrote and sent to Rome, he was etched in the minds of the people as a demigod while wielding his sword in Gaul. Today, we will examine the man who hammered the final nail into the coffin of the Republic as an engineer, a gambler, and a genius. If you're ready, we're crossing the Rubicon. 3. In 60 BC, the reins of power in Rome had slipped from the hands of the Senate. The city was ruled by a secret gang called the First Triumvirate: Crassus, Rome's richest man; Pompey, its greatest general; and Caesar, the people's darling. 4. Caesar needed urgent money and military victories to remain at the table. He set his sights on Gaul, the territory of present-day France, Belgium, and Switzerland. For the Romans, it was a hell filled with dark forests and colossal barbarians. Caesar didn't just go there as a governor, he made it his personal property. In campaigns lasting 8 years, he killed 1 million people and enslaved another 1 million. This was less of a conquest and more of the greatest systematic plunder of antiquity. Caesar became so rich that he paid off all of Rome's debts at once and began distributing money to every Roman citizen. He was no longer just a politician, but a phenomenon who always stood by those in need. 5. Caesar's military genius lay not only in strategy but also in logistics. While the Germanic tribes hid behind the Rhine River and mocked, saying, "The Romans can't cross here," Caesar ordered the impossible. 6. He could have crossed by ship, but that wouldn't have been impressive enough. He ordered his army to build a massive wooden bridge, 140 meters long, in just 10 days. The barbarians were already terrified as they watched the completion of this colossal structure on the opposite bank of the river. Caesar crossed, burned several villages, returned, and destroyed the bridge. The message was clear: nature is no obstacle for me. The bridge Caesar built over the Rhine River was not just a crossing point, but also a show of force. Let's examine the elements that made this structure impossible from a technical point of view. Pile driving system, fistuki. Instead of driving the piles vertically into the riverbed, the Romans drove them in at an angle of approximately 15 to 20 degrees against the current. This transformed the water pressure into a force that tightened the joints instead of destroying the structure. Beam and support geometry, massive transverse beams, 2 feet thick, placed between 2 main groups of piles distributed the lateral load caused by the river's flow. The bridge's static principle was based on the idea that the faster the water flowed, the stronger the bridge became. The force applied backward by the inclined piles further interlocked the supports. Protective barriers. Defensive piles were driven into the ground slightly above the bridge to prevent logs carried by the river or boats sent by the enemy from damaging the main structure. This can be considered one of the first examples of the debris deflector logic in modern dams. 7. Now we go to the furthest point in history, the Siege of Alesia. 80,000 Gauls led by Vercingetorix were trapped on a hill, while a massive relief army of 250,000 was advancing toward Caesar's rear. Everyone thought Caesar would flee, but they were wrong. 8. Caesar did not flee. He employed the donut tactic. He built a 2-pronged wall, a 35-kilometer-long defensive line to prevent those inside from leaving and those outside from entering. Alesia was not just a siege, but an earth-moving operation. Caesar's army moved approximately 2 million cubic meters of earth and rock in a few weeks. Now let's talk about some of the technical features of the walls. Contravallatio and circumvallatio. Caesar built 2 separate lines. The inner line, 18 kilometers, was to imprison the Gauls, and the outer line, 21 kilometers, was to stop any aid from outside. Turrets and range. There was a watchtower every 80 Roman feet, 24 meters, along the walls. This distance ensured that the effective range of a sling or arrow intersected at every point, leaving no dead zone. 9. Modern archaeological excavations have revealed death traps in front of Caesar's walls. Lilia pits, funnel-shaped pits, 3 feet deep, were dug in a quincunx pattern, like the 5 points of a die, arranged diagonally. This pattern made it impossible for a marching army to pass in a straight line between the pits. Stimuli, thorns, iron spikes with hooked ends were driven into wooden blocks and buried in the ground. This system is the mechanical ancestor of modern anti-personnel mines. Once stepped on, the hook would not come out without tearing the flesh. Sipi, spiked barriers. These lines, made of interlocking and sharpened tree branches, served the same function as today's barbed wire. The primary purpose of these systems was not to kill, but to slow and injure. A wounded soldier would not only be out of action but would also cause 2 soldiers next to him to stop to help. Caesar reduced the momentum of the enemy army to almost zero with these passive obstacles. 10. By the time the Gauls reached the wall, they were already exhausted and crippled. Caesar defeated them not with soldiers, but with geometry and engineering. When Alesia fell, Gaul was finished, and Rome's new master was confirmed. The traps in the scenario were force multipliers designed to neutralize the Gauls' numerical superiority, approximately 50,000 Romans against 250,000. 11. When Gaul was finished, the Senate and its former partner Pompey were horrified. They told Caesar, "Leave your army and come as a civilian, you will be judged." This was an invitation to suicide. January 49 BC. Caesar stood on the banks of the Rubicon River on the Italian border. Crossing the river with his army was treason. He stopped, thought, and uttered the famous phrase, "Alia iacta estate," the die is cast. He marched on Rome. Pompey and the senators fled the city in fear. A 4-year civil war began, stretching from Greece to Egypt. He formed an alliance with Cleopatra, pursued Pompey, and ultimately achieved absolute victory. 12. Caesar was now dictator for life. He changed the calendar, established libraries, and gave land to the poor. But he underestimated the aristocrats' allergy to kings. 13. March 44 BC. When he collapsed in the Senate with 23 stab wounds, his assassins shouted freedom, but they were wrong about one thing. They couldn't save the Republic by killing Caesar, because the Republic was already dead. Caesar's real bombshell was in his will. He left all his wealth and name to his frail 18-year-old nephew, Octavius, whom no one knew. Caesar 14 died, but Caesarism was born. In the next episode, we'll see how that 18-year-old boy will devour the world. Augustus is coming. Rome is just beginning. Do you think Caesar's current fame comes from his engineering genius or from his charitable works for the people? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe.